This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Edmonton Stingers coach Eric Fawcett. He discusses his role as a consultant scout and how he helps teams come up with strategic game plans, the implementation of scouting reports, and how to make this digestible for players, as well as pattern recognition in elite players. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Eric, you are talking to a very happy Englishman today. The England national football team won their semi-final against Holland last night, so I'm in a very good spirits. Looking forward to Sunday's game, where it might, I'm going to say the dreaded term, might come home, which it hasn't done for a while. But yeah, thank you for joining me on what should be a very insightful podcast in your work, but you should catch me in a very good mood as well, which is nice.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, my Canadians are having a little bit of a surge on the football side of things as well. Couldn't pull that one against Argentina. I mean, we're recording on July 11th, but it's still a pretty good vibe around here on the pitch, but not quite as big of a sport, of course, as in England. But hey, I'm in a good mood as well because we're talking coaching, we're talking sports. So thank you so much for having me on.
No, I appreciate it. And said your profile when I came across it looked really interesting. I think really good insight into some maybe some area of performance sport that I know a little bit about, but don't know extensive amounts. So it'd be really interesting to dive into your experiences and what you do and how you do it and why you do it certain ways. And I guess hopefully give everyone listening a bit of an insight and maybe grab some workings that they can do at home. So for people that maybe don't know you, haven't come across your work, do you just want to explain for us who you are and what you do from a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Yeah, so my name is Eric Fawcett. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is kind of the western side of Canada. I'm a basketball coach. I currently coach with the Edmonton Stingers of the Canadian Elite Basketball League. And really, more than that, a bigger part of my life is I do some remote work and consulting for Division I basketball teams in America, the NCAA side of things. And I work remotely for teams. If I had to, really dumb it down, I would say I help teams score. But to kind of zoom out a little bit further, I'm someone who uses team strategy, analytics, whatever I can possibly use to try to get an edge. And that for me is again trying to find what kind of tools with data and statistics that can possibly be used, and as well as I think I might watch more basketball from around the globe. I maybe I shouldn't say than anyone because I'm sure there's other people like myself out there. But at least in North America, where the game has been largely focused on the American game and the NBA. I like to kind of look a little bit wider than that and look for strategies that I can take from around the world, bring it to the college basketball side, and that's where we've had a lot of success. So I would say I started to do some consulting work for teams about 5 years ago, and then got really serious about it 3 years ago with a year-long contract with a school called Youngstown State, which went on to have their best 3-year run in program history by quite a large margin, leading our head coach Jared Calhoun to get a much bigger job at a university called Utah State, where I'll be working for them remotely as well. So that would be something I spend most of my time doing year round. And then the Canadian Elite Basketball League runs during the summer and gives me an opportunity to coach some really high level players from around the world, which is also wonderful because as much as working in my little office here remotely for college basketball teams, that's not the goal, that's not the dream, and it's great to be on the floor with some really high caliber guys, and that's what I get to do with the Edmonton Stingers.
Perfect. So before we go down the basketball route, am I touching a nerve if I mention the Stanley Cup?
Oh, yeah. So if anyone's aware, yeah, my Edmonton Oilers after a rough, we'll call it 15 years, just came just short. So when I was a kid, I was a massive hockey fan, and I think that nerve would have been touched. Now I'm at the point where I'm just happy that the Oilers could go on a fun run, and the city was alive. It was fun to go watch the games, and but no, you're Yeah, it doesn't sting too much. I'm just happy that I've watched a lot of bad hockey over the last few years. So for them to just make a game seven a deciding game of the Stanley Cup Finals, that's all right. But yes, if anyone around here around the listening is familiar with ice hockey, yes, my hometown Edmonton Oilers did come within a game of winning the NHL Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and listen, I'm a Spurs fan over here with football, as
Mm.
everyone who listens regularly will know. So I feel your pain and maybe always being the bridesmaid and never the bride in terms of winning stuff. But as you said, it was a good series from what I saw and what I heard and what I read, etc. Seemed like a good series, which is really good. So if we now link to the basketball front, I guess initially, what got you into coaching?
So when I was a kid, it's actually funny you mention that. I mean, for me, up until the time I was maybe 15 or 16, I mean, it was ice hockey, ice hockey, ice hockey, which is the story for a lot of Canadians, particularly Western Canadians, where I'm from. And to be honest with you, I think I kind of got bored with the sport to an extent. It was the way that the game was being talked about, coached, played. It was it was the team that was more physical and defended better. And when I say defended better, was more physical and played harder. That was considered the team that would win, and that was kind of the way that the sport was talked about. Is it was all about effort and physicality, and the team that showed more effort and physicality was going to win. And I that just kind of left me feeling a little bit empty. I think I always had that kind of idea that there was more strategy in sports, and I think when I first saw basketball in my teen years, I was instantly just kind of gripped with the way that just kind of the possession worked and the way that people moved the ball and the way that the spacing worked. And not a big basketball culture here in Western Canada. No real huge opportunities to advance. And so I never really thought it was going to be something where it would ultimately become a career. But when I was 19 years old, I started to coach high school basketball, coached basketball at the same high school for 9 years. And during that time, because again, I love the game, I started to be quite active on Twitter, again, talking about analytics, team strategy, stuff that I was noticing at that time, mostly college basketball and the NBA. And then I started to write, got some opportunities to do that, and different coaches started to see my work and said, "Hey, I really like what you're writing about this particular strategy. Would you be able to look at my team and how we play and do some of that kind of analysis?" And I was thrilled. I was like, I'm a high school basketball coach and someone who writes about basketball, and now suddenly some millionaires are asking me to help them win more games. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then it just led to more and more coaches hearing about what I was doing, asking if I could help them with things in their program. And then I thought, wow, like maybe, just maybe, this kid from Edmonton, where there's not a lot of basketball, not a lot of basketball opportunities, maybe this is my foot in the door. So I was still coaching at this high school. It's called Strathcona Christian Academy, and working for teams on the side, doing these kind of projects. And then it got to the point where I was like, oh, I think I need to kind of focus on working for these schools remotely. So I did that. I did end up coaching 1 year at Western Canada Prep Academy, which is kind of an elite prep school in Western Canada. I thought that was an opportunity I wanted to try out, so I did that for a year. And then when the Canadian Elite Basketball League, which is only in its sixth season, when they made when they were starting to gain prominence in this in this country, they made a coaching change 2 years ago, brought in a new coach with the Edmonton Stingers, and he was looking for someone to be a video coordinator. And he knew that I was working for all these really successful college basketball programs, and was thought, hey, I should bring, would you come in as a video coordinator? I was happy to do so. And then after that, was able to get promoted to an assistant coach position. So those are the kind of the two separate tracks been going on. The kind of coaching with the Edmonton Stingers at the professional level, while still working with these college teams. But yeah, as someone who's from a non-traditional basketball market, the internet, social media was just massive for me from a networking standpoint, for an ability to get my work out there and have eyes. And yeah, I think just everyone who's trying to carve out a role in whatever sporting world they're a part of, if you're from a non-traditional market, it can be a challenge. And luckily for me, Twitter was my way into it. And, much like Twitter's really the reason you and I are having this conversation today.
It's nice to know that Twitter does have some good aspects in life, which is good. Um, so when you mentioned, I guess, having the analytical side come into your coaching, which I think is interesting because from what you're saying and what I've read, I don't feel like you're just an analytical guy. You kind of have analysis of games of what you see. You have the figures and analytics that come into it, and then obviously having a coaching aspect. What made you capable of being able to drag statistics and appropriate statistics and make that bring to life what you were seeing on film?
I love this question, and it is something that I will often say is, and some coaches that know me will refer to me as like a quote unquote analytics guy or an analytics person, and I feel it's because for people who aren't into analytics, they would look at my use of analytics and say, "Wow, that's an analytics guy," because look at how many numbers he uses or how he's comfortable using that kind of data. But like you mentioned, I don't really consider myself an analytics person. I feel like it's something that is a bigger part of or a part of something bigger that I do. So I really think of myself as a basketball coach first. And for me, analytics is just a tool in the toolbox. I would associate it in a number of ways. I mean, first of all, with North American sports like baseball and American football, if you look 10 or 15 years ago, there used to be there was some forward thinking programs that would look at the swing paths of players and what they were hitting against fastballs or changeups, and you could get an edge by knowing that information. Well, now that's synonymous. And when managers use that information, they're not considered analytics people. It's just you need to know that. And in football, in American football, there was always conversations about should you go for a first down if you're, 4th and 5, depending on where you're at the field, or should you punt or should you kick a field goal? Hopefully, for those who are familiar with American football, this makes sense. It used to be a situation 10 years ago where some teams would use data to try to get an edge. Well, now it's synonymous. The numbers are out there, and coaches need to know them. And I feel like basketball is a little bit behind, where there's still just it's at the point where people who use analytics are still, at least in America, are largely seen as analytics people, where really, like, to me, it's just something that every coach should be at least somewhat familiar with. I'm not saying you need to be making every decision based exclusively on data, but it's something that if you're trying to make any strategic or strategy decision, I think you should be comfortable enough to know what numbers you should look at them and say, does this support what I'm doing, or does it suggest that I shouldn't be doing this? And if it suggests you shouldn't be, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you could look deeper and say, well, why would the numbers say this? And then you can start to, pull on that thread and find something deeper. So again, with coaches in whatever sport they're in, I would just really suggest that it's something that needs to become a tool in your toolbox. And that's something for me, like I really consider myself a sports fan. Like I love, again, I was talking baseball and American football, and talking about football with again, it's July 11th, so the Euros are coming to a close. Copa America's over here coming to a close, and I've watched more football in the last month than I have in a long time. And I'll actually be honest with you, Michael, as well. I haven't been able to check it out yet, but I've looked at your feed, and I kid you not, right now in my queue, there are 25 Sports Initiative podcasts in my feed because I saw, oh, here's a cricket coach. I'm fascinated. I want to see what strategies they're using that I can bring to basketball. Oh, I saw you had an Australian rules football coach. I'm really fascinated by how they use team strategy. I'm going to listen to that podcast. And I'm always looking to pull from other sports. But still, I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent from your initial question. I think what allows me to be able to bring in numbers so effectively and in a way that coaches that I work with have been able to implement is because I am a basketball coach myself, and I'm not trying to. Whenever I present something to a coach, I'm not trying to just say like, here are numbers, go do something with it. I come from hey, you've got a question or a problem. I have a strategy answer, and here is data to support that. And it's just kind of using both of those approach. So there's a ton of people out there that do analytics, and they're not coaches. They don't really understand how the game is played, at least and I'm stereotyping, but there are some people like that in the American basketball scene. And those are some of the people that the coaches that are anti-analytics that they sometimes have a problem with because they feel like they're speaking a different language and they don't understand the sport and are just trying to bring numbers into it. Where I think the fact that I do understand the game at a very high level, I'm able to one find the numbers that are important and cut out the fat and cut out the stuff that's noise and not going to help teams succeed, and just able to really hone in on what's important. And I think that that's huge for being able to use numbers and analytics in any sport is hyper focusing in on what's going to help you and cutting out the fat that's not, so you're not staring at a spreadsheet with 40 rows of data that you won't be able to implement, but find the one or two things that can help.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit of a chicken or an egg question here. If you're sent a request to go and either observe an opposition, and obviously you're going to do a scouting report, or you're doing a scouting report on maybe a team where the coach is like, what can this guy see that maybe is my blind spot? What way round do you do it? Do you watch a series of film first and then run data on them? Do you get data and then look to see if the film backs it up? Kind of how does that process work for you?
Awesome question, because this is what I'm doing all the time. I will say I will go data, film, data, and I will say the initial data is a quick look, the film is a lot of film, and then the final data look is a little bit of data. So let me lay it out. There's a program called Synergy, which is somewhat synonymous for most basketball programs around the world. Really, it's what allows me to watch film from Southeast Asia to Europe to South America, anywhere. They have logged all the different plays that and break it down into all the different play components. So whether it's in transition or the break, whether it's a pick and roll ball handler, whether it's a pick and roll man, the player that they pass to, whether it's and it breaks down every element of what teams are doing. So my first look is always going to be at the breakdown of what teams are doing, just to give me a little bit of a roadmap of and that way you can also look at a large data set. And then from there, I can say, oh, this is what percentage of plays they're running in transition on the fast break. This is what percentage they are throwing the ball into the low post into a big man and playing out of there. And again, it just that's what allows me to focus in on what I need to. If I were to watch one single game and maybe in that game they have somewhat of an advantage in the low block, so they throw it into a larger player near the rim a lot more. That might give me, if that was, one of the two games I would watch, that might give me an incomplete picture or an incorrect picture of how the team actually likes to play. So first of all, I can look at the larger data set of how that team likes to play and find out what I need to hone in on. And then from there, film is still going to be the largest components of what I do. And from there, looking at the play types that the team uses most often. And that's where I like to see, okay, what strategies are they employing? Because everything's still different. Again, I keep using this this posting up example, throwing the ball to a bigger player near the rim, usually with his back to the basket. There's 100 ways to do that. So looking at the data isn't enough to just say, oh, they like to post up. I want to see how are they entering the ball? How are they spacing the floor around that player? So still film is going to be the biggest component. And then lastly, I'll look once again and I'll look at some of the efficiency numbers. How effective are they at these certain different actions? And from there, again, it's one of those things that I would love to watch all 45 games an opponent played this year. It's not functional to do so, but I can look at their numbers over 45 games and I can start to see, oh, this player is shooting a 3-point shot in this style, maybe off a screen. And I can look at the whole sample size and say, oh, he's shooting this particular percent. I can make somewhat of an informed read, watch a couple of clips to see if it matches. And it's just an efficiency thing. I mean, I would love to watch more film, but if it's a professional season of 50 to 60 games or more, if it's a college season of around 30 games, it's just not a it's not reasonable to be able to watch every single minute all these teams play. So that's where you can use numbers, especially this play type data, and get kind of a larger feel without having to watch hours upon hours upon hours of film.
And how do you find anomalies in the data? So I'm thinking if you look at maybe a school that's got a particularly difficult schedule or particularly easy schedule, their data points, if they're early on in the year, for example, might not be a fair reflection of who they actually are as a team because they're either performing or underperforming. So yeah, how do you go around, I guess, identifying anomalies in the data, which then maybe don't subscribe to what you then see on film?
So if I'm working with like a professional team, what I like to do is, and let's say it's a professional team that's not at the highest level, maybe a second division team in a Spain or a Germany. I like to take out the games where they were playing really high level opponents and also take out games where they play really low level opponents just to kind of eliminate some of those maybe anomalies. You can also use different filters such as if the game is more than if there's a point differential of more than 25 points or more than 20, just cut out that data entirely. In basketball, we like to call that garbage time. That's usually the term that's used. If the score is 85 to 60 and there's 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, both teams are just trying to essentially
And
run the clock out. That data to me is messy and muddy, and I don't want it because that's not going to be an accurate look at how they play. So I like to pull out data like I don't want to look at what happens in, again, I'll use the term garbage time. And again, if a team is going to play a road game against a higher division opponent, that's probably not something that is going to be as important as if they're playing light competition. And as well, I would like to try to hone in on again, if I'm scouting for my team, the team I'm working for, I just want to look at how does the other team perform against teams that are like talent to us or like style of play to us. So just using some of those manual inputs to try to hone in on as much as possible because yeah, like you said, there's certainly going to be anomalies, and you want to make sure that you're not or there's injuries all the time, or maybe a player left to go play with a national program and that takes a key player out. Yeah, you want to try to eliminate as much of that as possible, certainly.
so then when you're looking at it from a strategy point of view, obviously in basketball, particularly in the pros, there's that real push at the moment to go with three pointers. And I think the Houston Rockets are probably the ones who started that, and I'm not sure it's for the better, but I won't go too far down that road. But how hard is it to then prepare a team that breaks that mold? So whereas you might have usually, 20% of the NBA teams, or no, sorry, 20 teams of the 32 are going to go 3 point high volume. They're going to play one center and a load of smalls around them to try and shoot, maybe go down the magic days with Dwight Howard. How hard is it to then prepare a report and prepare players for something that's completely the opposite that, where maybe they do have two big players that they're going to post up, or this team, run really high pick and roll, but they're looking for cuts in behind. They're not looking for shooters around them. Yeah, what does that process look like?
So before I answer the question, I think that there's a little bit of selection bias here because the teams that are going to employ me are the teams that want to be pragmatic and change the way they play and have players that are capable of playing different strategies. Like a coach that says, like, we play one way, it's my way or the highway, and we are going to live and die with our our system. Like, those are not the teams that are going to employ someone like me who is watching Japanese basketball late at night trying to find a baseline out of bounds play that can get us an open look. So I will say inherently, I think that my answer is going to be a little bit biased because the coaches that are going to play me are the ones that want to play different styles and want to be able to adjust, and therefore they're going to bring in players that that are willing to adjust. And it's different between again the two ways that, or the two kind of lanes that I'm coaching, because with professionals, I honestly think that professionals love the change. I think that they kind of welcome a new challenge, and like to do something different in practice, and almost enjoy playing a team that's a little bit different, as opposed to you mentioned the homogenization of the NBA game, where a lot of teams are playing the same style. Um, I think a lot of guys that are, professionals that have been at it for a while, they kind of like when a team is going to throw something different, and at a practice or a shoot around, we're putting in something different. And then when it comes to the college side of things, it's definitely a little bit more on the pure instruction side of things. And I think at that point you have to explain almost oh, this other team is playing this way offensively, and here's why, and here's the shots that they are attempting to create, and here's our counter and the shots we are trying to take away. And I think you kind of have to give that more holistic approach. So it's with pros, you can say, here's an adjustment. Go make it. This is what we're going to do. I feel with the college players, they want to know why, and I love that. And explaining to them, oh, our opponent is trying to play this strategy because they're looking for these shots. And if they can understand that first, it's then easier to say, now here's our adjustment, and this is what we're trying to take away. And and it's again something where I think it's important to have the players that are curious enough to want to know that, and embrace it. And those are kind of the two ways I would go about when you have to put in something for a different strategy, like you said, of like maybe a team wanting to play two big guys around the rim.
So if I look at this from a coaching perspective, because this is probably the bit that really interests me, and you've mentioned the why for the players, which obviously we all know is incredibly important. What is the process of actually integrating that into players' psyche and their first thoughts? So, if we look from a defensive end, because I think that's often the easiest to diagnose, and then maybe we can flip it. Say, for example, you've got a defensive team that normally go man for man. They jump under the pick and roll if there's a high pick and roll, and they look to jump under. But you've identified a weakness from the opposing teams in the data and then the film, that actually, if you go into a 3-2 zone, they find it incredibly hard to drive and then kick out to get the shots they want, or they find it hard to move the ball quick enough and end up taking poor shots. Obviously, that's quite a difference in terms of defensive styles. And if I look at it from a football perspective, it's the equivalent of asking our teams to go kind of high press, to then go, right, now we're going to sit into a mid block. And often people can get impatient and jump when they shouldn't, or maybe not cut off angles that maybe they should stop passes. From an actual tactical and technical coaching perspective, how do you go around facilitating that in sessions, and kind of showing them those looks within their training sessions to make them equipped, so that when they go into the game, they're capable of carrying out the task to get success?
So I think when you implement anything in basketball, it's not enough to just say, hey, this is our offensive set and this is how we run it. It's almost like, for me, for example, right now, switching everything is really big in basketball. I would say switching is more common than zone now, which used to be kind of the more, if it was man on man, like you mentioned, then zone was the most prominent. Well, now I would say it's man on man, and then it's teams that are switching everything, and then there's still zone mixed in. So for me, it is every single thing that we implement from an offensive end, it needs to be viewed through the lens of, how do we do this with the team that's going to play us straight man to man? How is this going to work against a team that's going to switch everything? And how is it going to work against zone? So for me, that's just like that's inherent with everything we put in. So from the first day of practice, if we are talking about, again, a pick and roll, that's going to be what we talk about. how does this look against man? How does it look against the switch? How does it look against the zone? And you just have to me, just like that has to be ingrained, because it's not going to be enough to just bring it in against one defense and then expect to be able to make adjustments there. And then on the defensive side of things as well, I think so many coaches, and you'll see this so often, even in if you watch any instructional coaching videos on a zone defense, or you watch any clinics, um, teams are putting in their zone, and almost always they get the offense to align the same way. They'll put a one player in right in the middle. They call it the nail, right on the free throw line. They'll put two guys in the different guard spots beyond the perimeter, and then they'll put two players on the wing, and then they'll show all their different defensive rotations in their zone against it. And then they say, well, that's how we play our zone. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you only looked at one way the offense is playing against it. And is that a common way teams will align? Yes, but it's certainly not the only way. So again, if we're implementing anything on the defensive side, will we look at that kind of look? Call it a dice look, a 2-1-2, kind of looks like the five on a die. That dice look, 5 out is really common. So everything we do defensively goes to 5 out. And then the other most common would be some combination of 4 on the outside and 1 on the low block near the rim. And again, it's just, I don't want to have to make adjustments in game every single time. I want to get ahead of it and be on the front end. And if you know where the game is going and you follow trends, which is something I just pride myself on, is knowing where the game is going, having a deep understanding of how the general teams in our leagues play. I want to get ahead of those things. And again, just like what you mentioned with the strategies you were talking about that are so common, two of these ones, why implement something against one of them and then talk weeks later when you're playing an opponent that does something different, how you're going to make an adjustment when you know, hey, there's going to be multiple teams on our schedule that play this way. It's just like so to me, it's just an inherent part of implementing things. It's just kind of ingrained in what we do.
And how often, because I like the idea of obviously giving them looks within training. I guess there are challenges to that because some of it may go against your key philosophies of what you want to do if you're trying to almost be a scout team for the opposing team, and there's obviously an element to that. But how often are you getting time in sessions to actually work on that? Because, in an NBA season, you've got 82 games. So there's going to be a lot of traveling, a lot of obviously games within that. You mentioned earlier around the 50 games at the pro level, 30 at college. That's alongside, if you're in college, studies, shoot arounds, not wanting to load. You've got SSC or athletic development, all of that type of stuff. So how much time are you actually getting on court to work with players specifically on those sets? So if you use, for example, the zone defense that you mentioned, or I mentioned originally, and you've kind of gone with, if we go like that, how often are you actually getting time to give them the looks against some of the key offenses that they're going to be coming up against? So go, yeah, listen, this is a staple that everyone will run, but here's a 5 out one, here's a 2 bigs in the post one, and giving them the appropriate time to actually understand the adjustments so that when it does come up, they're capable of going against it.
Yeah, so I would say largely at the professional level, we're playing 2 or 3 games a week, and college, it's almost always 2. So certainly not as taxing a schedule as the NBA kind of season that you mentioned, but again, still, it's like no coach has enough time to focus on everything they want and everything they want to do kind of scouting wise or preparation wise for a particular game. And so you've got to pick your battles. And again, it's one of those things where even if we have an hour and a half or 2 hour practice the day before a game, well, if we spent 2 hours preparing for every single action an opponent runs, no player is going to be able to retain that. So again, I do think it's something about really honing in on what matters. And again, it's something where that's where play type, looking at different play type data can really be effective because, maybe a team runs one really pretty play where they get a 3-point shooter open on the opposite side of the floor with a screen. And you want to be prepared for that because no coach wants to have another coach run a really nice play on them and score. So, some coaches you'll see they spend 5 or 10 minutes of practice being prepared for that play. Well, if you look at play type data, you'll see that they might run that one time a game. So to me, using 5 or 10 minutes for something the opponent's going to run once or maybe twice is not a good usage of time. But if it's something like, oh, and you actually, the zone one's a perfect example too, because that's something that play type data can really help us with to show, oh, this team plays their 3-2 zone 35% of the time. That's something that Synergy can help you with and find out. So if you know that, oh, I know this team is going to do that roughly 30 to 35% of the time. Okay, well, to me, that probably means it's going to be roughly about that amount of time in practice. So if we even have 45 minutes for a shootout or a shoot around, we should probably spend 10-15 minutes on how we're going to attack the zone and go about it that way. And again, I think this also gets into how are we communicating that, and how can we reach people and players in a way that is going to work for them. So being on the court is fun, but some players really like film and they want to see on their phone. They want to see videos sent to them of how does this zone look. And again, sometimes even when you play against a certain defense, you're on the floor, you see things differently. Watching the broadcast view, watching the film, you see the whole of the defense a little bit differently. So I love when players are really into film. Not everyone is, but if there's a player that or players that really like film and learn in that way, that's fantastic to be able to prepare in that way without them having to put more physical toll on their body and maybe just get a little bit of a different look. Oh, we went over an offensive scheme for 5 minutes in practice. Oh, now let's watch 2 minutes of it on video. That can really solidify what these players did, and it's something that I think about a lot from an efficiency standpoint. I'm even playing around with, like, this is not an app I use, but a lot of my players use TikTok and love TikTok. I've really thought about, can I put pregame scouts on TikTok and have guys approach it that way, because it's an app they use every day? Or Instagram, can I make a private Instagram and put up some of this video on Instagram in an Instagram reel so they can pull it up while they're looking at Instagram anyway. So I'm constantly looking of ways to bring in ways other than, like, okay, everyone, like, let's go get 10 guys on the court and spend a lot of time doing it. So film is, of course, another way to hopefully expedite some of this learning.
And you mentioned around being ahead of the curve of knowing, I guess, what teams are coming with. What does that look like from you as an assistant or coach, or trying to prepare the coach for that? How far are you breaking down? Are you breaking it down by trends of what the team generic normally do? Is it done by lineups? Is it done by how certain player personnels will affect the entire team? To what degree do you start doing those breakdowns so that you can almost knock your coach on the shoulder and say, this is the 4-1 that we spoke about, or this is the 5-out that we spoke about, or I'll remember if they go 2 in here, this is the counter that we spoke about. How detailed is your actionable scouting report which you then use in a live game?
Yeah. So again, for me, I think you've got to pick your battles. I would like to say that we played last night, and I think, quite functionally, I could tell you every single time down the floor what the opposing team was running, because we're deep into the season and I, have done my work. I know what they're running. But if I was to try to shout out every single play and what our counter to that is, the mental load on my head coach, the players, that just wouldn't work. And I don't need to, coach every dribble and coach every defensive rotation. But for me, a big one is I'll call it after timeout plays. You'll hear that talked about in basketball, where with our system in FIBA of 10-minute quarters, one TV timeout per quarter, plus the 5 timeouts or 4 timeouts per coach every single game, you're going to end up a situation where the opposing team has 8 or 10 plays where they're able to go to their huddle, draw something up, and come right out to the floor and run it. So which is also an opportunity for coaches to draw up something maybe new, but it's usually something they like to use their, like, best plays for. So that's a time where I try to be really dialed in, and that's where I look back in the film for multiple games, usually their whole season, always trying to know what they run out of timeouts, so that when they come out of a timeout, if I see them align a certain way on the floor, that's where I can yell something out to the players. Hey, Nick, this is going to be a pin out. Hey, Nick, elevator. Hey, Trey, they're going for that. He's going to slip this. Like that's where you can use 8 or 10 plays that the other team is going to run something structured and try to get an advantage there. Or in late game scenarios, that's another one as well. In the final minutes of a close game, coaches are going to go with what they're most comfortable with. It's seldom our team's going to try to drop something very new on the biggest possession or biggest couple of possessions of the game. So that's a time as well where the game slows down a little bit, and I kind of know from tendencies of previous games what are teams going to try to run, and those are the times where I am certainly going to be vocal with my head coach, with the players on the floor, and again get back to like, hey, this team is going to run. There's an action that's taking over basketball called the Spain pick and roll. So if you're probably, we might see a Spain pick and roll. Well, we've worked on that in practice throughout the year. I know they're going to run it. That's where I can just communicate, hey, Spain pick and roll. We're switching guard to guard. And just like that quick communication, don't have to say, oh, they're setting it up by a dribble handoff into a ball reversal, into a ram screen, into a Spain. I just want the player to know, hey, this play is ending in a Spain. We're switching it guard to guard. And that's not anything new. They know we switch guard to guard, and then we defend it and hopefully execute to a high level. So again, for me, it's just picking your spots. I'm not going to try to call out every single action. I'm looking particularly after timeouts, end of games, those big moments where you really do have an opportunity to communicate those types of things.
Playing devil's advocate, if you have an awareness of what is coming down the court, why wouldn't you give them the heads up?
Yeah, again, to me, it's just the mental load of like if the average kind of game at our level is going to be about 70 possessions each. So there's certainly times where when they're coming down the floor, if they're getting and again, it depends how teams play a little bit, whether they're again a motion team that is the play isn't looking to end on one particular shot. They're going to try to just, continue to move the ball, break down a defense, get downhill and play out of that. Or if it's a play, some teams are going to play that way. Or there's teams that, again, the play is going to end in a pick and roll like we keep talking about. I'm still going to be more likely to call it the pick and roll, but I just don't want to be, if I'm calling out every single action, which could be 3 a play on about 70 possessions per game, I just personally don't think that a player is going to have his ear open for 210 actions a game and be able to also play freely. So, would love to be able to do that. I just think the mental load on players is going to be a little much. So really picking the spots and so that and again, like if something too with my players is like, if I'm yelling something from the bench, they listen because I'm not yelling at them every single possession. Like that's something that's important as well. And again, we've also got a head coach and other assistant coaches as well that are communicating different things. Mine is definitely the strategy side of things, both ourselves and with the opponent is. So I try to just make it for me that like when I talk, they know to listen. And if I talk too much, there's just no way that they're going to be able to pick up everything.
No, it makes complete sense. And one thing that I saw maybe a couple of years ago was a quote from someone in the NBA saying that the reason the Lakers won with I think LeBron and Rajon Rondo there is because they're like chess masters, and over a 7-game series, they would be able to start figuring out your tendencies or what you were looking for. And as the game's going on, they themselves would be in a position to organize people of what to ready to jump on or what information to give. With those high level guys, I guess from a perception point of view, how in tuned are they with the film and then the bits that you're discussing, or how much of it is a feel for the game where they're feeling what the opponents are doing and maybe just their general understanding of the principles of basketballs or the philosophy of the other team is then guiding to what they think they'll then see as a next action?
For me, I think that it's largely a feel thing with those really high level guys. And the way I like to see it, like think about it as well, is I feel like players at that level, their basketball vocabulary is just so large. And I don't know if that's the right word, because I don't mean they know, oh, this is called a Spain pick and roll and this is called an Argentina pick and roll, or all those terminology we like to use. I like, it's their pattern recognition and their vocabulary of, oh, I know that when a team lines up this way and the ball starts moving side to side, they're probably looking to run this action because I've seen it so many times. Like, that's something watching LeBron, watching the Rajon, Rondo. I mean, you nailed it. Like, two guys that are known as being some of the highest IQ players in the history of the game. Their just recognition of their pattern recognition is spectacular, and I think that that's just something that they're able to do with, oh, I'm running this offensively, and the low man on the opposite side of the floor is starting to creep in to provide support on the ball. I know if I throw to the corner, the only place that they can rotate is from the other guard spot, and they can just start, and the wheels just start turning that way. And again, that's why something that I find super fascinating. And honestly, I think I saw it in one of the previews for an episode you might have done, again, a couple of years ago. I'll have to listen, but I think I went all the way back to maybe 2021 of episodes I was looking for that would be interesting to me, is again pattern recognition and pattern recognition with elite players. And so certainly some of those guys are we're probably a lot more into the film earlier in their career, learning some of these tendencies and building that vocabulary. But now I don't, like, when you talk about that championship the Lakers won just a couple of years ago. I'm not sure that they were watching hours of film before every game. In fact, I would reckon they didn't. But they, really relied on that ability to make recognition in real time and make adjustments.
No, it makes complete sense, and it does for me. It makes you understand, I guess, the value of playing a lot when they're kids, playing in a lot of games. Obviously, there has to be some understanding of that, but actually giving them opportunity to play in games and maybe not just do static shooting practices, because the more you play in games, the more you get exposed to those moments, gives you an opportunity to develop those type of pattern recognition skills. In reference to the work that you do, you mentioned like the Japanese second division, or Argentinian 17th division, or whatever it may be. How do you begin to assess what plays or principles might be able to translate to a slightly higher level? Because I'd imagine, some stuff that maybe they do from a creative standpoint works with the particular players they've got, or because the players they've played against aren't the best. So how do you begin to analyze the footage of what may work and what may translate, and what actually you need to kind of get rid of?
Yeah, great question, because again, everything is about efficiency, and when you're looking at so much great basketball around the world, you need to be able to find out, yeah, what'll translate and what won't. And I think, again, that's something where you can even start with looking at any play and looking where, like, let's look about an offensive play. Do we think it's going to work? Like, right away with the way that defenses line up, you can say, hey, is at lower levels, teams are going to be much more likely to just everyone sucking in towards the paint, taking away the paint, and being a little bit more passive. So right away, if you're looking at an offense that is largely looking successful because they're playing against a really conservative style of defense, yeah, again, that's probably not going to work. Or, like I said too, with in the game right now, where there's such a prominence of switching every single action, not fighting through screens, but just simply switching. Suddenly you can start to look at some of these actions where teams can kind of are more comfortable fighting through the actions, and the offense isn't quite capable of building advantages out of that. Suddenly it's like, okay, well, I know my opponents would guard this way, and that's not something that's going to work. So again, it's contextualizing things like that right away. You can kind of tell just immediately by how a team lines up. Are they going to guard it this way? And again, this is where it's also important to understand the different levels and around the world. Like, right now in Europe, the way of guarding a pick and roll is extremely aggressive. And in North America right now, the way of guarding a pick and roll is extremely conservative. So a lot of the pick and roll actions in Europe that are designed about that are designed around the idea of like the defense is going to be aggressive. So we want to move the ball very quickly as the defense is moving and then attack from one pass away. Well, that's just not going to simply work for the American college teams I work with because teams are not going to guard it that way. So I don't know. It's constantly running it through that filter of how do the teams that are in our league, like we know how they guard. How are they going to approach this? So there's some stuff that looks beautiful on film from some great leagues in Europe, and it's not going to translate to college. And there's also some stuff at much lower levels that certainly will translate. And again, it's almost something that to me it's like recruiting, whether it be for the college teams or for the professional teams. I mean, with the Edmonton Stingers right now, we have some guys that played in the G League that was the level just below the NBA in America, and we also have guys that played second division in Germany, and trying to figure out which guys are worth bringing in. To me, that's where it's very valuable that I watch so much basketball around the world because I can contextualize. Oh, this is the quality of athlete at this league. This is the way they guard here, but they're not going to guard like that in the Canadian Elite Basketball League. Like, so that's why it is so important to me that I can't imagine only watching North American basketball like so many people here do. But it's the more you watch, the more levels, the more styles you can understand, the easier it's going to be to contextualize things.
And listen, I'm a San Antonio Spurs fan, so probably my most fond memory was the year after the Heat beat us in Game 7 with the Ray Allen shot, where it seemed like the basketball we were playing that year was described, and I would say rightly so, as kind of poetry in motion with the amount of ball
Mm,
movement and stuff. It looked incredible. And a high proportion of that was done via players that probably weren't North American players. You think players like Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, obviously Manu Ginobili, list could go on and on and on and on. What do you think the key differences are, or during that period were, from a European basketball, if you're looking at EuroLeague, where you see people like Luka Doncic come across from, to the NBA? Yeah, what do you think San Antonio saw at that moment in time that was different to what everyone else was doing to decide that that was a route that they were going to go down?
Yeah, so I think when you look at American basketball, like the goal of basketball everywhere is space. Much like again, I love learning about different sports and watching different sports. And almost always the answer to every question is space. You want to create space. And basketball is no different than ice hockey, than at least to my understanding of football. You're creating space to create advantages. And with the American style of game, going back then, the answer was get to space and be stationary. Put two players in a ball screen and have the other three players go and stand as far as possible away, usually corner, the other corner, and then high in the slot, we call it. And that is the answer to spacing in American basketball. Whereas in Europe at the time, and still to this day, the answer to space is movement. You don't simply go and stand in one space and create your spacing that way. It's you move to space. And I truly do wonder, as I try to learn more and more about football, like you see these guys that grew up on the pitch, like they understand moving to space. And that's something too, like I said, I've been watching more football the last month than I have in a very long time, because I'm trying to find what's going to translate to basketball, and the movement patterns are just beautiful. And again, it's like in soccer or football. Sorry, I'm doing my best to keep on the football thing, but the answer is not, hey, everyone go stand in their one spot on the floor and that's our spacing. It's move to create space. And I think that you saw that with, again, some of the players you were talking about, like Manu Ginobili, still to this day one of the most fun players to watch. Someone who he would start a possession standing right next to a Dirk Nowitzki, and again, to an American that would look like, oh, it's bad spacing, but then those players would split off with incredible timing and then move all at once, and then suddenly you're making the defense have to put multiple players in motion as well. And again, I get this question all the time from American coaches who want to dip their toes into watching the European basketball because they know I watch it more than anyone they know. They always ask, what is the difference between North American and European basketball? And to me, it is what I just told you. It's everyone wants spacing. They want to create space. The American model is go stand stationary in space, where the European model is move and create space through movement. And again, I think that you even mentioned Luka Doncic. He mentioned something on a podcast a couple of years ago that was really funny. He mentioned, well, people here found it very interesting and funny, but he thought scoring 30 points a game in the NBA was much more difficult, or sorry, was much easier than scoring 30 a game in the EuroLeague. And that was something he talked about, was the different spacing in the NBA versus in college, and the different way that teams played. And so that was something that opened a lot of people's eyes. And again, Luka Doncic coming over and being so successful right away. But yeah, I think the Spurs were the first team to really capitalize on the European concept of moving to space as opposed to sprinting to space and standing still.
Yeah, and I did see that podcast and quote, and it ruffled a few feathers, but I also understood what he was saying behind it. And I get on that point. The bit that I find really interesting is Pep Guardiola in football. Obviously, he watches a lot of sports, has a lot of interest in a variety of different areas from chess and whatnot. Probably one of the things he's implemented really well with City is on the switch of play that we call it in England. So if the ball's coming from one side of the pitch to the other, is that cut behind the defender. They do that particularly well. So as the ball's come in, the timing of the run from out to in. Now in basketball, that's a really good move. If the ball's on one side of the court, you're getting it round to the top of the key. Someone running towards the basket, and you're able to feed the ball into him to then kind of go in, works really well. Naturally in football, if someone makes that cut and movement, you'll see a bit of a rotation to fill that space that you're talking about. So if you have got someone on the far side of the floor that's cutting in, you'll naturally see the person that he's probably run past the cut towards the goal drift wide. And that will then, he'll fill that space. And then if the cutter doesn't get the ball in football because he'd be offside, he would then drift back into that pocket. So it's quite interesting what you're talking around, I guess, with the stationary aspect to the movement aspect, because actually, by the nature of us having offside, there comes a point where you have to make a run. And if you're offside, you then have to move into a different direction to then get the ball from somewhere else. So yeah, I can see why maybe there's a transition between those two things, or a correlation between those two things. Might be something for us to talk about off air, because I think that there's loads of similarities that we could talk about. I am conscious of time, so just one last question for me, which is, if I were to ask any of the people that you work with to describe you and your work in 3 words, how would you hope to be described, and why?
Wow. First of all, I don't know if you know the NCAA basketball game or football with the transfer portal. It's talked about,
Yeah, I
essentially
did. Yeah.
free agent. And I know you just said you were conscious of time, but
No,
um,
good.
for those who don't know, essentially now in American college basketball, there's free player movement. Essentially, everyone is a free agent every single year, and it makes for a very frantic 60 days right after the season ends, with just of the like 3,500 players, I think it was something like 1,700 of them found new homes. So it becomes just a pretty chaotic period of player movement, and you're often on Zooms with players trying to get to know them as quickly as possible, because players make decisions quickly, and we're constantly looking for really good questions to ask players, and to get to know them and get to know the way they think. So I'm always thinking about what are ways you can ask players questions to learn more about them and get some insight into them as a person. And I think that one might be one that I have to adapt and use. So thank you for that. 3 ways that I'd hope they describe me, or that they would describe me. I forget how you asked it, but I think the first thing is, people would definitely say I'm respectful. I really respect the game of basketball. I respect our players. I don't belittle them ever. I respect our opponents. I treat them with a lot of, like, again, I take everything they run seriously, and that reflects in the way that I prepare. I'd also say it reflects in the way I treat everyone around the arena. By the time we walk in and there's an older gentleman who opens the door for us, that's a guy I'm going to make sure to ask ask how his day is and know his name and the facility staff around the arena. Like, I think that they would describe me as very respectful, and that would just touch a lot of things that I do. I think they would say that I'm innovative. Again, you've kind of we've talked about it, but it's something that I take great pride in. Knowing where the game is going, having my finger on the pulse of what's happening. When anytime a player or a coach, hears a term that they haven't heard, maybe they're on Twitter or watching a broadcast of a game, or they hear, if they want to know about a trend, like they know who to ask, and it's me. So I think that they would describe me as innovative. And I think that they would also say that personable. I'm someone who, again, I mentioned it earlier, but I know everyone at our arena, in any role, from facilities to the people that sell merch to people who work in, like I talk to everyone, and I'm genuinely interested. I want to know where people are from and what their interests are. And I'm the one right now. You could any players on the Edmonton Stingers. I know where they grew up. I know where they went to high school. I know who their coaches were in college. I know that Tay Donald loves to go disc golfing, and Adika really loves craft beer. Like those are the things that I just like. I want to know. It's not even something I strive to. It's just like I could ask you, off air, where are you from, where you live, what is your town known for, and that's just stuff that's always just like I need to know people. I love people, so they probably, those would be the three words I think that they probably use to describe me: as respectful, innovative, and personable.
No, I think they're really three really good words. And as I've said before in the podcast, and people will be sick of me saying this, the reason I asked that question is because I think it's quite self-enlightening of how you'd want to be thought
Mm.
of around the building. And then your next thought is, am I that? So if that's how I hope that I'm seen, that's how I hope that I'm portrayed to the outside world. Do my actions match that? So you've given really good examples in terms of, that sociable nature of being able to speak to people and respectful of the building. Now, if you said, "Oh yeah, I'm really respectful," but then you think, "But recently I've been leaving basketballs
Mm.
here, there, and everywhere," or "I haven't been clearing up after myself," or "I haven't said hello to Janice on reception, and she's going through a tough time at the minute," it kind of gives you a little bit of a check-in of going, okay, that's something I need to address from one of my values. So that's the purpose of the question. So yeah, please do steal it for the nil recruits. I'm sure that it will be an insightful one, and I guess it
Hmm.
sees how it integrates into the values of your program and stuff as well. So yeah, it will definitely be an interesting. But yeah, Eric, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the wonderful insight into your work in the working world. And I think definitely some useful bits of information that people can take away with them and figure out, regardless of what sport they're in, actually how can they begin to integrate some statistics, some analytics, some video analysis, and then bring that to life in a coaching perspective of what strategies and plans you're then putting in place when it comes to training sessions or game days, etc. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. Like I said, I've got, I think I saw 23 podcasts downloaded. So I'll be an expert on your podcast again soon. And again, I just love so much learning about different sports. Even when you started to talk football strategy there, like, those are the things I love. I love learning about different strategies from different sports, and view it through a lens of how can that be implemented in basketball. I mean, you mentioned the Edmonton Oilers earlier. I'm sure you're familiar with this name, but someone who's always been a little bit of someone I've looked up to is a former hockey coach named Ralph Kruger, who was fired from my Edmonton Oilers, somewhat unjustly, depending on who you asked, and to see him go on to have incredible success in a different sport, like that is something I find so admirable and impressive, and it's something that I almost aspire to. Like, not that I'm trying to get into a different sport, but I'd like to be someone who is so understanding of how sport works and how strategy and data works that it could be transferable. So yeah, just tying it back to an Edmonton Oilers reference you made earlier in the podcast, that's something that's definitely important to me.
No, and listen, you've hit the nail on the head of why I do this podcast. The whole reason for it was a New Year's resolution with my wife, and the opportunity for me to learn from people and go, actually, could I steal that? Could I bring that into
Mm.
my work? What does that look like? So, what you're feeling and saying there is exactly the reason why I do this, because I feel like Particularly in my world, we underutilize people around us who work in different sports and might challenge the way that we do and think. So yeah, mutually minded, which is great. But yeah, thanks again for your time, and we'll catch up again soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.